I was standing right next to the mahogany coffin, breathing in the thick, sickly scent of lilies and regret. My father was gone. Richard, the man who was always traveling, always on a critical business trip, the man whom my mother divorced years ago because she said he loved his briefcase more than his family. Now I was alone, sorting through his massive, complicated life. The real shock wasn't his death, it was the reading of the will the next day. The lawyer, a stiff man named Mr. Davies, cleared his throat and announced the provisions. The house, the stocks, the vintage car collection, all mine. A huge relief, considering I'd just graduated and was drowning in student debt. But then Davies read the addendum, and the air froze in the room. He stated, in the driest tone possible, that I was obligated, as the sole heir, to allow a distant relative, Mrs. Clara Thompson, and her two minor children, Leo and Sophie, to reside in the main house with me for exactly 1 calendar year, or the entire inheritance would revert to a distant, unspecified charity. My jaw dropped. I had never heard the name Clara Thompson in my life. Distant relative. Dad didn't have any family left besides me and my mother, and Mom was definitely not a distant relative. Who were these people? Why was Dad forcing this bizarre cohabitation? Before I could even protest or demand an explanation, the front door bell chimed. Davies smiled weakly. I believe that's Mrs. Thompson now, Anya. She's moving in today. My heart pounded against my ribs. This woman, a complete stranger, was walking into my inherited home, and if I didn't welcome her with a smile, I risked losing everything my father had ever built. I watched her enter the living room. She wasn't distant. She looked far too comfortable, sizing up the room like she owned it, guiding a small boy and girl who looked utterly terrified. And the boy, Leo, had my father's exact dark eyes. The first 3 months were a living nightmare of cold politeness and slammed doors. The house, which had always felt grand and echoing, now felt stifling and small. Clara settled in immediately, claiming the largest guest suite and annexing the kitchen. She wasn't loud, but her presence was a constant, suffocating weight. She treated me, the legal owner of the house, like a peculiar tenant who was occasionally allowed to use the toaster. If I left a dish out, she would leave passive-aggressive notes on the refrigerator. If I changed the TV channel, she would sigh dramatically loud enough for me to hear from 2 rooms away. The children, Leo, 10, and Sophie, 7, were shy and withdrawn. I tried talking to them, offering cookies or asking about school, but Clara always hovered, pulling them away with a sharp whisper about not bothering the owner. The worst part was the looks. Leo, especially, would stare at the photos of my father displayed around the house, his little brow furrowed in concentration, as if trying to place the face. One evening, I was walking past Clara's room when I heard her on the phone, her voice low and furious. He promised me, Mark. He promised this was mine. 1 year. That's just insulting. I deserve more than this glorified babysitting gig. She wasn't just a distant relative needing shelter. She sounded like someone who felt cheated out of a grand prize. A wave of ice water washed over me. What had Dad promised her? The only prize Dad had was his wealth, and according to the will, that was all mine. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, and the longer I stayed in that house, the more convinced I became that Clara wasn't a relative at all. She was something much, much worse, something that smelled of long-kept secrets and profound betrayal. I started digging, desperate to uncover the true connection between Clara and my father. My research was fruitless. No social media presence, no shared business connections, and Mr. Davies, the lawyer, was a brick wall. Every time I asked him about Clara's specific lineage, he just repeated the vague phrase, as stipulated by the deceased, she is considered a relative for the purpose of this unique clause. The whole thing screamed cover-up. I spent hours in my father's study, which I had barely touched since his death. It felt sacrosanct, yet holding the answers. I noticed a small, antique wooden box on his desk, tucked behind a stack of old ledgers. It was locked, and none of the keys on his massive, jangling keychain fitted. I was convinced whatever was inside held the truth. The irony was devastating. I lived in the house my father left me, surrounded by his possessions, yet I felt utterly disconnected from the truth of who he was. I began to look at Leo more closely. He wasn't just staring at the photos of my father, he was staring at the photo taken the year before he died, standing by the sailboat. When Dad smiled in that photo, his left cheek dimpled sharply. I noticed that Leo had the exact same asymmetrical dimple when he quietly laughed at something Sophie said. It was a genetic signature, a physical impossibility if Clara was merely a third cousin twice removed. My hand started shaking. I needed to open that box. I drove to the hardware store and bought a cheap set of lockpicks, feeling like a thief in my own life. Back in the study, it took nearly an hour, but finally, with a soft click, the lock gave way. Inside, the box wasn't filled with cash or diaries, but just one item, a small, tarnished brass key, much older and heavier than the modern safe keys. The brass key felt cold and weighty in my palm, clearly designed for something substantial, not just a desk drawer. I took photos and sent them to a locksmith friend, pretending I'd found it cleaning out an old family attic. He identified it instantly as a key to a specific type of high-security deposit box often used by banks decades ago, before digital security became common. I recognized the bank code embossed on the key's head. It was the main branch where my father kept his most private accounts, the one Mr. Davies handled. I rushed to the bank the next morning, my heart hammering like a trapped bird. I bypassed Davies, marching straight to the safe deposit counter and presenting the key and my father's death certificate. The teller was hesitant but, seeing the genuine key, confirmed the box's existence and my access rights as the primary heir. She brought the box out. It was heavy, worn, and smelled faintly of dust and old paper. I carried it to a private viewing room and sat down, expecting to find deeds, hidden offshore accounts, or maybe a secret family album. Instead, there was only one item, a thick, legal-sized envelope, sealed meticulously with dark red wax stamped with Dad's signet ring. Written across the front, in my father's familiar, slightly shaky handwriting, were the words, Anya. Only for your eyes. Open exactly 6 months after my passing. I looked at my phone. It had only been 4 months and 3 weeks. The lawyer had mentioned an addendum to the will, but he'd only focused on the cohabitation clause. Was this the real addendum? The true explanation? I felt sick with anticipation. I was so close to understanding this nightmare, but Dad, even in death, was dictating the timeline. I carefully placed the envelope back in the box and returned it to the bank. I had waited 4 months. I could wait 6 weeks. But every minute I spent back in that house, under Clara's scrutinizing gaze, felt like an eternity. The next 6 weeks were unbearable. The tension in the house was now a visible entity, shimmering between us during silent dinners. Clara sensed my newfound resolve, my sudden lack of fear, and she pressed harder. She started leaving brochures for real estate agents on the kitchen island, circling high-end condos she suggested I buy after I sold the main house. She talked constantly about needing funds for the children's future, and how complicated inheritances were, hinting that splitting the assets now would be much cleaner. I just smiled, a small, knowing smile that infuriated her because she couldn't place the source of my confidence. I knew she was expecting a massive payout when the 1 year was up, possibly half the house value, or a trust fund she could control. She was arrogant and greedy, making her mistakes visible. Then, the 6-month mark finally arrived. I drove straight to the bank at 9 sharp, retrieved the heavy box, and sat in the viewing room, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the seal. I thought about the man who wrote this, the father I thought I knew, and the life he kept hidden. Was this letter going to destroy the memory of him completely? Was he a monster? This waiting period has been torturous. If you knew a devastating truth was waiting for you, one that explained everything but might ruin your peace forever, would you break the rules and open it early, or respect the condition he set, knowing the delay might save you from immediate shock? Let me know in the comments. I held the thick envelope, took one deep breath, and ripped the wax seal with my thumbnail. The paper crackled loudly in the silence. The letter started not with an apology, but with a statement of fact. Anya, if you are reading this, I am deeply sorry for the complexity and pain I have caused, but I had to protect them first. The very next line confirmed the terror I had suspected. Clara was not a distant relative. She was Richard's partner of 12 years. Leo and Sophie were my half-brother and half-sister. I dropped the letter on the floor, the truth hitting me with the force of a physical blow. 12 years. My mother divorced him 8 years ago, believing he was simply addicted to work and travel. All those business trips to Paris and London, he was living a second life only 100 miles away. I picked up the letter again, reading through blurred tears. Dad explained that he met Clara during a low point in his marriage. It started as a brief affair but grew into a secret family. He never left my mother because he feared shattering my childhood and losing his standing in the business world, but he couldn't abandon Clara or the children either. He maintained 2 houses, 2 full lives, funded by 2 separate sets of accounts. The letter explained the terms of the will. He knew my mother would attempt to contest the will if she ever discovered Clara's true identity, and she would certainly try to evict them immediately. He created the distant relative clause and the 1-year cohabitation requirement specifically to shield Leo and Sophie under legal ambiguity until I could learn the truth directly from him, via this letter. He was protecting the children, using me as the necessary shield. But then, a flicker of hope and vindication appeared on the next page. He wrote, Clara believes I left her a different settlement. This is key. Do not let her know the truth until the final day of the contract. My rage at my father suddenly shifted, focusing squarely on Clara. She was not the innocent relative being bullied. She was the long-term mistress who knew exactly how precarious her position was and who was now using the children and the will to leverage a massive payout. I reread the part about the different settlement. What did that mean? I carefully checked the envelope again. Tucked into the bottom fold was a second, much smaller sheet of paper, notarized and dated 2 weeks before his death. This was the document Clara didn't know about. It was the true final instruction. It detailed the creation of an irrevocable trust fund for the sole benefit of Leo and Sophie, specifically for their education and maintenance, accessible only when they turned 25, or earlier with a court order. Crucially, the document stated that the trust would only be executed if Clara Thompson relinquished all claims to the property and vacated the main house on the final day of the cohabitation contract. If she refused or tried to negotiate, the trust would be dissolved, and the money would go to the charity mentioned in the original will. Richard hadn't just protected his children, he had preemptively foiled Clara's anticipated greed. He set a trap, and she was walking straight into it, believing she was playing me. I sat back, the exhaustion replaced by cold, calculating resolve. I had 8 more months to play the clueless owner while Clara acted out her role as the entitled, wronged relative. I kept the documents hidden, observing Clara, who grew increasingly aggressive about the house sale. She often complained about Richard's stinginess, mentioning a substantial financial promise he had made her. She was expecting a fortune, completely unaware that her greed was about to cost her everything, and that my father, even dead, was calling the final shots. The remaining 8 months crawled by. I became an actress in my own life, adopting a facade of mild confusion and helplessness whenever Clara mentioned finances. I bonded slowly with Leo and Sophie, spending time with them when Clara was out, teaching Leo to play chess and reading Sophocles' stories. They were sweet, sad children, caught in the undertow of adult secrets. I realized my father's plan, though deeply manipulative, had worked. The year of forced proximity allowed me to see them not as threats, but as family. When the 365th day finally dawned, I woke up with a feeling of profound liberation. Today, the nightmare ended. Clara was exceptionally cheerful. She had already packed several boxes, clearly expecting to move them into her new, half-house-funded condo tomorrow. She wore an expensive dress, ready for her meeting with Mr. Davies, whom she had instructed to prepare the paperwork for the property division. I had already called Davies too, but my instructions were very different. I told him to execute the final, secret addendum of the will, which superseded all previous discussions regarding the property. Clara strode into the kitchen, humming. "Anya, dear," she said, setting down her coffee with a theatrical flourish. "I trust you found a nice small place to move. This house is simply too large for one person. It's better for everyone this way, don't you think? Richard always intended for me to have a stable home for the children." She was condescending, arrogant, and clearly believed she had won the year-long battle of attrition. I simply nodded towards the door. "Mr. Davies is here, Clara. I believe he's ready to finalize the agreement as per Dad's absolute last wishes." Mr. Davies entered the living room, carrying a slim, black briefcase, his face professionally neutral but his eyes full of pity, directed entirely at Clara. Clara was radiant, taking center stage on the velvet sofa. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Davies. I believe the year is up, and we are ready to finalize the transfer and division of assets, per Richard's verbal promise to me and the general spirit of the original agreement." Davies did not even look at her. He turned to me, offering a curt nod. "Miss Petrova, are you ready to execute the final, binding document of your father's estate, the one dated July 14th? I placed the hidden notarized paper on the coffee table. "Yes, Mr. Davies. Please proceed with the execution of the children's trust." Clara's smile vanished. "What trust?" "We are discussing the house, Mr. Davies." Davies put on his reading glasses and ignored her interruption, beginning to read the document I had provided. He articulated every legal phrase clearly: the creation of the Leo and Sophie Petrova Irrevocable Education Trust, the substantial funds held within, and the absolute requirement that Mrs. Clara Thompson must vacate the property located at 42 Linden Street within 48 hours of this reading, surrendering all claims to the house and any other assets of the estate, or the trust will be instantly dissolved. The color drained from Clara's face. She didn't get half the house, she got nothing. Worse, She realized that Richard hadn't just hidden the truth from me, he had set her up, ensuring she couldn't touch the children's money, but forcing her to provide stable housing for a year. Her rage was terrifying. She lunged across the table, trying to snatch the document. "You forged this. Richard would never. You lying little parasite." Davies quickly shielded the papers. "Mrs. Thompson, this document is notarized and signed by Mr. Petrova. Its validity is beyond question. You have 48 hours to leave the premises. If you fail to comply, you receive nothing, and the children lose their trust fund." The karmic wave crashed down on her instantly. She realized her greed had been anticipated and weaponized against her, leaving her utterly alone. Clara left in a flurry of screaming, weeping, and threats, dragging 2 suitcases and leaving the children behind in their rooms. She couldn't risk dissolving the trust, the one thing my father ensured she couldn't sabotage. The silence she left behind was profound, a vacuum of tension replaced by a hesitant sense of peace. My father was a man of unforgivable lies, a fact I had to live with, but in his final act, he had shown a sliver of true paternal love by protecting his youngest children from the consequences of his betrayal and their mother's avarice. I finally sat down with Leo and Sophie the next day, not as their suspicious landlord, but as their half-sister. I told them a simplified version of the truth, that their father loved them very much and wanted them to be safe, which is why he made sure they had the house and the trust fund. They were remarkably resilient, relieved that the source of the constant tension, Clara's manipulative presence, was gone. I decided to keep the house. It was large enough for all of us, and while the start of our family was born from scandal and secrecy, I found myself drawn to the quiet responsibility of raising my young siblings. My relationship with my father is irreparably complicated, a constant study of resentment and grudging admiration for his complex plotting, but the final letter saved me. It gave me the upper hand and, most importantly, it gave me a new family I never knew I needed. I found peace not in revenge, but in choosing connection over bitterness. Thanks everyone for watching. If you liked this, please subscribe to the channel Dramatic Zone, leave a like, and write in the comments which country you are from. Stay tuned, there will be a new story tomorrow.